I don't ever feel like I really start at the very beginning of something maybe anymore, because one work sort of leads into the next. So there's a whole sort of continuous process going on, just investigations through materials that are constant. But I suppose at the beginning of each particular thing there'll be a sort of period of pretty loose experimentation with materials and some sort of idea of what to do that always turns out to be quite redundant, because something will happen through playing around with the materials that will sort of take the work on. I suppose whatever the materials are, they're raw materials. They're in a, like, it would never be something, you know, sort of hard like wood or metal. So it would always be something that is in some sort of raw state that could be or is supposed to be made into something else, transformed into something else, and often I'll leave it in its raw state or use it like that. But it would be a combination of what I sort of think to be maybe traditional sculptural and sort of drawing materials like chalk and paper and paint, and then the other half of the materials is all sort of things like makeup and sort of beauty products, toiletries, sometimes strange sort of like maybe things that you could say are medicines for really sort of minor ailments like Vaseline or Alka-Seltzer or aspirin, things like that sort of come into it. The title of the work in the show is Wish List. It's like a sort of aspirational work, like any sort of wish, I suppose, in some ways. Like, it's kind of like a dream of the future that doesn't exist, which would always be more positive than it actually turns out to be in reality. And I think that's about sculpture really as much as anything else. It's about that, you know, that sort of aspiration to make a really big, important work, or something, to make a really good sculpture. All of the works that I make hold within it a sort of propensity for failure. Even within the sort of aspiration, they've already failed and admitted that. You know, if you sort of think of something like an Alexander Calder, or maybe even like an Anthony Caro or something like that, that's made of metal, or a Rodin or something, you know, the sort of what you would expect from a sculpture, that's sort of maybe the wish for sort of immortality through art, but also for achievement and recognition as well. But those things, you know, a question is it going to last 400 years like those things will? You know, this most definitely isn't. It's made of paper and it's really sort of vulnerable and it's already quite ripped and stuff. The fact that it's going to sort of, it fails to be totally permanent or totally solid doesn't mean that the sort of level of ambition within it to make it a sort of good and substantial work is the same. It's trying to elicit at least an impetus towards physical response, which is basically to say you want to touch this thing, but you're not allowed to touch it. It's a purely visual experience of really kind of physical material. I suppose usually that something wouldn't be treated with very much preciousness or care, but then because of the environment that it's in then within the museum or any sort of art context, then that gives the signal to say that this is a precious object and not to touch.